Welcome to the Founders Corner, brought to you by OneBridge Accounting. Here's your host, Eli Clark. Hey everyone, Eli Clark here, founder and CEO of OneBridge Accounting and host of the Founders Corner podcast. Today's guest is M. Thomas, the founder of StackCat Content. I'm very excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Tell us a little about yourself, what you're doing at StackCat. Give us kind of the quick rundown.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I identify as an entrepreneur by trade. I just feel like I'm constantly dreaming up business related things. And I wandered into my first entrepreneur experience as a freelance writer. From there, I realized A, I love telling customer stories, and B, I love running a business. And so I sort of converted that into what is now StackCat. We're a case study production agency. We do a lot more than writing now, which is very exciting. But essentially, the value prop is that the customer can tell your story better than anybody else, and putting customers at the center of your marketing is kind of the best thing you can do. So we just help people bring that to life.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm really excited. I think we're going to kind of talk through your story framework and kind of your keys to success and what you've been able to do over the last year or so at StatCat. But before we jump into that, I saw one of your posts on LinkedIn that you'd done the digital nomad thing. And I've done that a little bit before. It's a crazy ride, and I know some people find more success with it than others. But just to get us started, I'd love to kind of just do you have any personal stories, anything that you learned doing the digital nomad thing, things you like, things you didn't like, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, boy, do I have some stories. It was insane. It was insane the whole time. So it was last year. I did February in New Zealand, and then I ran back to Colorado. Actually, sorry, this is 2 years ago, I think. Oh gosh. No, it is last year. This is last year. Okay. February, New Zealand, ran back to Colorado to pack up my things, was there for a week, went to Maine as my jumping off point, then did Europe for 80 days, came back to Maine, had to move across the country, then to DC. Like, so last year really was like something like 7 months of very consistent travel.
Hmm.
It was bonkers. I feel like parts of it were fantastic, parts of it were chaotic. If I had to do it again, I would not move countries as often as I did when
Hmm.
I was in Europe. I did 11 countries in 80 days, staying in hostels for quite a big chunk of that. And that made working insane.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't know what Wi-Fi was going to be like. I mean, my poor clients, they were so sweet. And um, I had one client that I called every time from a different airport. And he was like, "Where are you today? And where are you going?" Um, and the Wi-Fi was terrible and whatever. But I mean, it was a crazy experience. It was my lifelong dream. So I feel like there were a lot of pros and cons, but it's wonderful to look back on, I will say.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I've worked with some people that have done like the Southeast Asia type of tour, right, where they've spent
Yeah.
time in Vietnam or Thailand or places like that. And yeah, like working and building a business while being a digital nomad, I think is really challenging. I think maintaining a business, if you want to sit on the beach in Thailand and sip margaritas or something, like I think you can do that to some extent, but definitely building a business can be really challenging when you're moving around so much.
Bingo. That's exactly it. And even where my business is right now, I would be in a better position to enjoy that experience than I was a
Mm.
year ago. So yeah, I mean, it was very interesting. I remember feeling like I worked a ton.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool. Yeah. Well,
Oh,
thanks for letting us kind of go down that little unique route a little bit. There's a lot of people that kind of have that dream of wanting to travel and work. And sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. But it's kind of cool to hear from somebody that has tried it and has been through the ringer, if you will. Right. So,
yeah, totally. And I still do it a lot now. The thing I would do differently, and the thing I do differently now is I just go to one place for longer, and I try to not have to work as much, and I'm not doing as long of trips. But if you're gonna do it, I would just say, just stay in one spot. You're gonna be fine. There's plenty
There
to
you
do.
go. And you spend more time getting to know that area, right? So that's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, make a friend. Uh,
Yeah, I love it.
get some
Well,
room for a second.
yeah, totally. Let's dive in a little bit. I was on your website. I was kind of looking at kind of what you're doing. Love your value proposition. Love kind of the niche market that you're focused in, or the niche product or service that you provide as far as case studies go, right? And I was on
Yeah.
your website and I saw you have this thing you call it the success story framework, right? Run us through that. Like, what are the different phases of that framework? How did you come up with that? And kind of tell us kind of how that's been, I guess, the bread and butter of your success or your methodology.
Yeah. Um, so in my experience, first as a freelance writer, case studies were the project that fell through the most. And so there were a lot of reasons for that, but I do think case studies are sort of one of the snaggier pieces of content that exist. There are so many checkpoints that have to be smoothly crossed for the project to continue. And if your customer says yes but doesn't schedule, or if they schedule and then they
Mm.
cancel the appointment, or if you write it and they don't read it and give feedback, like there are so many steps logistically that it's hard to get by. And then the other thing is that oftentimes marketing teams are doing case studies when somebody tells them to. So either the CEO has, a bee in their bonnet about case studies all of a sudden, or the sales team is mad at the marketing team, and so somebody's telling somebody they need to do case studies.
Mm.
But um, it doesn't often come from strategy, and I feel like that's a big miss. If I had to recommend one piece of content startup to do, if they were only going to do one, it would be a case study. And so, in making my framework, it came about A, because of this logistic concern. So I said, okay, let's map a journey that we're going to do every time. Super repeatable. I can tell you what's going to happen at each of those things. And then B, it adds an element of strategy that isn't usually there. People wind up doing case studies of maybe their biggest name clients, or clients who come up to them and say like, "Oh, I'm so happy," and yada yada yada. But you wind up with a collection of case studies that either resemble each other too much, they don't actually reflect the ICP that well, they don't talk to different benefits or features. So the strategic component is about making a case study program, which is something that I don't think that many companies are thinking about. So that's kind of how that was born. Most of the parts of the framework resemble typical kind of content processes, but it's the strategy element and some of the logistic elements that kind of make it a little bit more of a unique method.
No, I like that. I like what you're saying, that sometimes the case study is almost like this passive thing that just occurs in the marketing, department or the marketing space, where it's like, a client comes to you, like you're saying, who is like, hey, I had a great experience. Do you want me to give you a testimonial, right? Type of
Yeah.
experience, where instead you're saying, let's create these intentional, strategic case studies that we can then share and use in our marketing efforts, right?
Yeah, totally. And case studies, I mean, I think in B2B we have grown like numb to the impact of a case study because we're all reading so much stuff all day long and they can feel
Mm-hmm.
kind of boring. But think about like the first question I ask a vendor, and a vendor asks me, is, do you have any evidence that what you do is effective? You would think that even for someone who's going to just come over and mow your lawn, you might say, have you done this before? Like, this is a standard kind of question of any sort of business relationship. And your case study is your answer. But I don't think we're always thinking about it in that kind of depth of utility. But the utility is extreme. Your sales department can use it, your marketing department can use it, your product department can use it. Everybody can benefit from the information that you garner when you talk to a happy customer. Um, so yeah, I mean that's my soapbox.
Yeah. I love it. Well, Garrett, you have this whole time to stand on that soapbox and tell us all about what you believe and what's most important, right? So this is a great opportunity to do that. So that leads into a next great question of how do you identify that gold, or that like that just that story that just connects perfectly with that client, or how do you identify that story?
Yeah. I mean, this is one that differs a little bit from client to client because some clients are intimately connected with their customers.
Mhm.
They know them very well. They know their stories very well. And so they know exactly what they love about it that makes it a great fit for them. In other cases, in products that maybe are more like a PLG format, there may not be that intimate connection. And then you sort of need to go out. You might have to go into the interview with a little bit more of an open ear to figure out the direction that's going to be compelling. But I think that there are a couple of components. Um, First, and I'm jumping ahead here because I really love to ask about um, objections and how we got over them. That is almost always an interesting conversation because somebody on the team is going to say, "Ugh, we don't need another tool,"
Mhm.
or "I'm not sure that this is worth the price," or yada, yada, yada. But somehow they became a customer and not just a customer, but now a customer advocate. So their objections and how they got over them is like a massive key to understanding um, what your customers are looking for, what their problems are, and how they got around them. Um, I think if you can, I think if you can tell the story of the objections as they came up, now all of a sudden, like imagine passing that case study off to a CEO who has thought to themselves, like, I don't know that we need another tool. And then the case study itself says, we didn't feel like we needed another tool, but we went ahead and did it anyway, and we're so glad. That's a big piece of gold. The other thing I would say is that let emotionality kind of seep through, especially in the B2B space where we can be so bland and neutral and professionally um, focused. I think it makes sense to understand like there's stress, there's overwhelm. What's the before picture look like? And what does the after picture look like? And then how did we actually get there? How fast did we get there? How do how does everybody feel now? Because I think when you kind of dig into the feelings, you'll find the most relevant kind of constructs to tap onto into the interview. But if you're skipping the feelings the whole time, you're not going to have a North Star to guide you.
There's a lot to unpack there. It's really interesting. So let's, if we can break that down to maybe like some tactics. Are you
Totally.
are you like asking, so you're sitting down with one of your clients and they've got a number of clients that they think are could be good for a case study, right? They've identified those, and then you're
Yep.
doing this interview. Or do you have like a list of questions that you're going through to try and identify like, hey, what were your issues beforehand? What did this solve? Like, what does that look like as far as actual tactics to find those golden nuggets, if you will, within the story?
Yeah. So when I'm joining a call with my client's customer, it's always kind of a funny whatever. The end customer, end user, I'm going to tell them flat out, I'm going to dance along a timeline for this whole conversation. We're going to start by just, I want to understand you. Sometimes I work in a nonprofity space where it's important to understand their mission and yada, yada, yada. So we'll kind of do a little precursor, and then we're going to dive into a before, during, and after. When it turns into a case study that ends up looking like a challenge solution result, which is like a structure that pretty much every marketer in the world is comfortable with. But in the case of the conversation, we're going to do before, during, and after. So I'm going to pick on what prompted the search. That's kind of the big key there. So we want to understand, how did we even begin searching? What were the feelings there? What was the frustration? What tools were you using? I love it when people are comfortable naming names. That makes a great case study. Because then you don't need to find these like intense ROI stats. You just need to stand out against the other solution. So let's try naming names. Let's see, who'd you look at? What were you using then? What irritated you about that? Kind of diving into this before chunk. The during section is sort of about early onboarding, implementation, some of the usage questions. So we're going to say, okay, you said yes. You got over the hump. You figured out your objections. Like now, how did it go? How long did it take for you to start using it? How did your team feel? Um, did it start saving you some time? Yada, yada, yada. And then we're going to jump into like, where are we now? What got you to customer advocacy, essentially? Um, what stands out about it that makes you so happy? What are the results that we can talk about and measure? Um, and just kind of seeing it as a timeline, A, is helpful for you, but B, it also helps them understand like we're just telling a story here. It's not about having a great answer to any question. Um, and then if we're going to do any sort of data, sometimes they'll have the numbers in the conversation because they looked over whatever prep questions I sent them. But very often I just say, hey, I'm going to send you a follow-up email so you can go and get the data I'm looking for, um, and send me that in a follow-up. So we're really focused on a pretty defined story arc.
Yeah, so it's pretty well established as far as, you said this before, during and after story, right? This
Mhm.
the challenge, right? So I guess over time you've nailed down and figured out how to ask those questions efficiently and pull out those golden nuggets, right? So that's really
Yeah.
cool to see that. How do you balance the authenticity, like this real story from the end user, the client's client, right? How do you balance the authenticity of the story with the branding objectives that you have in telling this narrative or telling this story?
Yeah, I actually think those things are often one and the same. And it's because if the customer is a customer advocate, the only the only circumstance where they wouldn't be is like they're getting a massive incentive. So they're like, sure, I hate this product, but I guess I'll come. But in general, you can assume that they are pleased. And if you have a customer that is pleased enough to donate 30 minutes of their time to talking to me, who they who they don't know, um, then they're actually your perfect customer. They are a person who perfectly experienced uh, your marketing and sales, then your product, and now they loved it so much that they just want to talk about it with me. And so when we're talking about authenticity versus branding, I mean, I think the customer is like the middle of that Venn diagram,
Hmm.
um, because their story is going to be the best possible ramp into conversion in my mind, because it should be very relatable. They literally did it. And so now we just have to kind of find other people who are at the same starting point and get them along kind of the same ramp. So I find that it tends to be pretty related. The only case where I see some contention sometimes is executive teams that are very hung up on sort of big, bold ROI conversations. But I'm also pretty open early on that I'm not into that. I think most of us don't really think that your content management system quadrupled your revenue. We see that stat and we probably trust your case study less. So in those cases, I'm also usually trying to get some executive buy-in into the idea that we can talk about impact, and we can talk about it in data, but it doesn't have to be this like weirdly convoluted ROI thing. It can be about time saved or money saved, or it can be about number of applications processed, pieces of content managed. All of that is still good stuff, great stuff, and more relevant probably. People aren't buying software unless it's like a sales generation, whatever. In most cases, people aren't buying software to raise their revenue. They're doing that to solve an issue. So we just need to demonstrate that that's what's going on there. So whenever there's a rub between storytelling and brand, it's usually about that.
I like that. Instead of, maybe being so focused on how does this tie down to revenue, whereas a lot of times, again, in the B2B space, if you're selling a software, you're selling something that is operational, you're not necessarily saving money when you have an operational cost, but what you're doing is you're solving an issue, whether that's becoming more efficient, right, or that's
Yeah.
solving a particular pain point, right, often related to efficiency, right, but um,
Yes.
yeah, that it's almost anecdotal evidence, right? Or it's not necessarily like tying this back to revenue, but tying it to uh,
Yeah.
how
If
the
there,
team works together, right?
yeah, if there's a direct connection to be made, it can be made. Savings is a great obvious one,
Totally. Yeah.
but I don't think that we need to make claims because we can all understand that efficiency is ultimately going to make you money. More efficiency is going to just do that. But we as the seller just need to ground ourselves in direct fact. Um, we don't have to take ownership over a brand's growth in the time that they've used our tiny tool. And we can still make a huge impact that way. And I think I'm just constantly trying to convince people of that. Like, you don't have to reinvent the whole wheel. You just have to kind of improve the little spoke that you have to offer, and it'll go smoother for everybody.
I had a conversation with a marketer many years ago that was talking about, the stories that we should tell in marketing are not our stories. It's not what we do and that sort of thing, but it's the stories of our customers and our clients, right? And case studies do allow you to do that, I think, really well, because again, it's not about me, and my company and what we do, but it's more about this was a problem that somebody had, and this is how they solved that problem. And maybe it wasn't a perfect solution, but they're happy enough that it worked, right? Like you're saying, and they're talking about it, and they're happy through it, right?
Yeah. And in the nonprofit space, for example, the results section sometimes also ends up being about the impact of the ability to do something that smoothly. So
Mm,
if you can make payment processing, like this is a SaaS that sits kind of at the corner between nonprofits and tech. It's like they do payment processing for governments and nonprofits. So like if you can ease the payment processing, people can literally pay their rent. People can literally
mm.
keep the lights on. People can respond in emergency, whatever, and you can go into those impacts because that's the part of the storytelling that's really impactful. And it's true. That is true. Payments were processed, so this is what happened for that one person or for communities. And I think in general, B2B can get more creative about understanding the impact of the felt kind of ripples.
Yeah, we can get kind of stuck in the professionalism almost, right? Or
Drives me nuts.
the that aspect of B2B, right? Can
Yeah.
feel very I don't know what the word is, like
Uptight.
almost inhuman, or yeah, maybe uptight, or
Mhm.
inauthentic perhaps, right? It can feel that way often at times. So
Yeah, 100%.
let me just ask a couple of questions related to tactics. Like again, going we talked about tactics a little bit earlier, and we kind of touched this on a little bit, but can you give us some examples of like specific questions that you're asking in these sessions with clients, in order to surface these customer stories? Like can you give us a couple examples of what those questions look like?
Totally. So looking at the before section, this one I think I gave some examples before, but I really love um, what kicked off your search, what was the thing that pushed you into doing this? I love to ask, you tried a couple other things, like why didn't those work? How come you couldn't use something internal? And then you kind of want to figure out like who's who's deciding, how many people are involved in the deciding, and how ultimately did you get everybody on board? That's always an interesting conversation. And typically in that question, we reveal like, what about this tool is the perfect fit for you?
Mm,
So that part typically gives us good fodder to kind of go into this during section of like, okay, this is what spoke to you. How has that been? How has that felt? Um, we can also talk about team uptake. How have the other people who touch this tool, how did training go? How long did it take? Um, we can also kind of dive into how has your correspondence with the software team, how has that been? Have you been able to raise concerns? Was there anything that was really snaggy? And this is great too because typically this is essentially fishing for compliments. But sometimes you get useful product feedback, and that's the kind of another byproduct of case studies that is so great is to be able to get off a call and say they were so pleased, but I do want to let you know, like they flagged this little thing or this kind of sticky moment as being an issue. So, do with that what you will. Um, and all of that feedback. So kind of digging into like where has relief come from is kind of the guiding light there for the during. And then when we look at the results, here is kind of where some of the more classic case study questions come in. I love to make them tell me like to boil down into top three benefits is a great one, especially if you feel like conversation has kind of whatever. It can be elusive. So you can focus on by making them make a list. Um, you can also say, depending on their clients, ask about the outcomes that their customers have had. How has this affected them? And then because you asked about their feelings before, ask about their feelings again. Depends on who you're talking to, what kind of answer you're going to get. But often you get some good quotes from that part. And then typically I also make them tell me like if they were talking to a colleague who's in a similar position, um, how would you kind of convince a skeptical person to give us a try? And so that can kind of give some good insights too. But I will say, for folks who want to improve their interviewing skills, I have taken quite a few classes with this woman on LinkedIn named Hannah Shamji, and I can send you her LinkedIn. But she used to be
Please do. Yeah.
she used to be a therapist, and now she's a customer researcher. And she is the coolest. And she just has a very interesting approach. And it's sort of more geared towards customer research, but it has totally kind of revolutionized my approach. And I think that's part of the reason why my tactics feel like a little bit organic, because I think that they are. You wind up following the trails that are given to you when you are listening for questions to emerge in the conversation. And so if you're a person who's like, ugh, I got to do a lot of customer interviews and I hate it, um, her LinkedIn is just chock full of good stuff.
Yeah. We'll get that. We'll put it in the show notes for those who are interested in getting in touch with her. That's
Cool.
great. As so you know you're kind of asking these questions, you're involving these case studies, which is fantastic. How do you then repurpose that content across different mediums, across different channels? So you've got, video, you've got written in the form of like blog, you've got social. What does that process look like as far as taking that content that you have and then putting it into the various channels?
Yeah, if you gained customer consent to record video, then sky's the limit on all of that. In many cases, that's a little bit harder to acquire, especially depending on the industry, I have found. But if you've got to go ahead on that, then we're talking about long form video, short form video, long form written content, short form written content, quotes that should be stuck all over your website, onto social media, graphics, things of that nature. So we have all of these forms that are like what we think of as traditional content. The piece that people sometimes forget is this like sales acquisition piece. Um, Case studies sit as the bridge between sales and marketing. They're perfect content to send in follow-up emails. They're perfect content to reference in pitch decks. But sales isn't going to just go ahead and read the blog page like for fun. So you kind of, at StackCat, we make what we call a map. So we're going to highlight, who's the customer, what's the vertical that they fall in, where's their location, any other demographic information, what are the benefits we covered, what are the objections we talked about, to kind of make this cheat sheet essentially for the sales department so that when they're on a call, they can say, oh my gosh, we have a client who's just like you, or send in a follow-up, a link to the case study or the case study video. You want to cover as many verticals as you can. That's part of the reason why doing that strategy piece initially is going to come around to be very helpful so that you have a great case to send to every kind of prospect that you're going to talk to. And then if you make all of that content in different ways and forms, you can kind of check the box for how people like to absorb information. So yeah, I mean, sky seriously is the limit there. The only thing I'll say is that in outreach, um, video consent is a little bit harder to gain. Um, but it depends. I recommend that everybody should test it. If that's something that's on their radar, they need to see what it's like. You can add incentives, so on and so forth. But it's a great tool.
Yeah, you can kind of disperse it into all those different types of content or different mediums. And like you said, people consume content in different ways, what they prefer to read or listen or watch, right? So
Totally.
um, good to repurpose it as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
Well, as we're wrapping up, there's a couple more questions I'd like to ask, just kind of about internal systems, internal processes, what you guys have found to be effective.
Yeah.
So, when you're managing multiple clients, especially at scale, as you guys continue to grow and you've got a large number of clients that you're working with, how do you manage projects like that effectively to make sure you're hitting deadlines, you're not mixing up clients with, you know, different things that
Yeah.
need to get done? How are you guys doing that effectively at scale?
So I will say we are at the corner of that conversation up until now-ish. It has lived in my mind, and then I just give it to my team over emails in the way that every freelancer dreads so very much. So I'm working on remedying this. I've tested out a bunch of tools. I have found a content management tool that I am enjoying, that I think is going to work really well for our team. And starting the process of putting everything in there. Um, it
Would you mind giving them a shout out if you're comfortable with it?
no, no, it's Relato. They are great. Relato. They are like a content marketing uh, manager built by marketers. So it has some qualities that you'll recognize from Notion or whatever, but it's really designed for the process of content management, which is great. Some of my stuff lives in Notion still. I think I'll probably try to get everything over there. But I'm horrible at ops. Like that is my weakness by a lot, a lot. And so, now's the time where I'm like really looking that in the face. I have been trying more tools in the last week than I've tried in the last 2 years. So,
Wow. So getting
and
ready to scale then pretty quick, hopefully, as you guys
yeah,
go into this is year two pretty soon, right? For you guys?
yeah.
Yeah. So very
Um,
cool.
and I'm in a big growth push right now. So yeah, trying to get everything, the foundation laid so that when my efforts pay off, um, we are ready to sustain that.
So you mentioned just like testing out tools and things like that. What if I guess what have been some of the biggest operational challenges that you've seen as you've scaled, and what do you anticipate seeing as well as you continue to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very aware of the fact that founder-led marketing has pros and cons. And I would, in many ways, like to push back a little bit on that, to move to a pipeline that feels a little bit less related to me, dependent on me showing up every day on LinkedIn. And so the two operational buckets are A, project management, and then B, sales automation that doesn't feel like slimy, weird, unpersonalized. Um, and so I've been playing with a ton of tools. I'm also impatient with tools, so they have to be like very easy because I'm just, ugh, it's the worst. I'm every like tech person's nightmare. So trying to find a set of tools that A, works for my brain, B, I feel like I could make into a process that I can outsource to my team, which is made up in many cases of family and friends who come from different backgrounds. And so kind of looking for tools that are easy and intuitive, and then that can be felt as authentic, um, is just really important to me because I don't want to just join the party of pitch slapping, but I also want to get better at selling, and so it's like this funny corner where I think you have to do it wrong a lot. So that's kind of where I'm dancing around right now.
Yeah, it does seem like that's just the story of business though, is doing a number of things wrong until you figure it out and you do it right eventually, right? And then it changes and then you got to do it wrong a bunch more and until you figure out what's right again, right?
A
So,
1000%. And I'm having a lot of fun. I'm listening to some books by Alex Hormozy right now, which is like everybody's sales god. But it's just great, I think, to hear a person who's like so salesy talk about sales in a way that, feels accessible. So I'm trying that out.
Totally. I love that. Well, Em, it's been great having you on the show. One question I like to ask, just as kind of a wrap up question, just because the marketing industry is changing so much on such a rapid speed, what are some things that you're looking at trends that you see in the next 3 to 5 years? Like, what are you doing to stay up to date? What do you kind of see on the horizon?
Yeah, I kind of hinted to that a second ago, but I'm curious to see what happens to thought leadership. I think, you know, with the Nick Powers of the internet, sort of bringing a Twitter energy to LinkedIn, and to brand, I think people are starting to get more into that. I also think people are like, we're doing it funny. Like someone has like a make LinkedIn weird course now, which not to criticize them personally, but I just find that to be like the most B2B version of authenticity you could possibly have. Like, why'd you have to make a course? What do you mean? But also good for them, get that bag. So it's like I don't really know what I think is going to happen to thought leadership, but I think it's changing. I mean, I think we're tired of doing lists, and maybe a course is actually a good thing because we just want to get people to kind of show up a little bit more authentically, but people still want to feel like they're leaving with educational bits and bytes. So I'm very curious to see how thought leadership evolves. Um, I also, am very tuned into the AIification of everything.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that that's even another piece of an argument for sort of the Nick Power edition. AI isn't tweeting out what Nick's got. So, it'll be interesting to evolve. I feel guilty that I roasted the course girl.
No, I mean, all good, right? But it's interesting. It is such an interesting space, marketing industry, right? And or the sales industry as well, like hand in hand, because it is changing so fast. And things like thought leadership, things like courses, like you mentioned, that is such a sales thing, right? But it's interesting to see how that space continues to grow and evolve. And that's kind of the fun part about being in the marketing space, right? In the marketing industry.
Yeah, a thousand percent.
Cool. Well, Em, if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, I'm ever so present on LinkedIn. That's M Thomas there. And then, yeah, accessible by email. That's em@stackcatcontent.com. Carrier pigeon is fine. However you want to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Well, Em, it's been great having you on the show. Thank you again so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you for joining us in this episode of The Founders Corner, the podcast series for marketing firms and agencies looking to learn and level up their business. You can check out more podcasts and other content from OneBridge Accounting by following the links in the show notes. At OneBridge Accounting, we're all about helping marketing and creative firms organize their finances, maximize their profits, save cash, and automate their accounting and finance functions. Check out our other resources and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.